Well, hello there, and welcome back. My name is Stephanie Safarian, and you're listening to episode 486 of Sustainable Minimalists. This is a listener-supported show about intentional and eco-friendly minimalist living. On today's show, we're discussing the wellness effects of clutter. Now, you know it to be true. Once a purchase is made, the item is ours to maintain, to manage, to store, to clean, to do all the things. And yet, sadly, in a consumerist society, consumerism never talks about the negative consequences associated with buying. Now, there's a lot of them, and my guest today will list them out in our chat. However, the main negative consequence is, of course, cortisol, the stress hormone. And so here are some stats. Are you ready? According to NAPO, NAPO is the National Association of Productivity and Organizing Professionals. According to NAPO, the average person spends a staggering 1 year of their life searching for misplaced items. This equates to 8,700 hours wasted in the pursuit of lost belongings. And one more statistic there to really hit it home, 80% of the items that we bring into our homes never end up being used. These are consequences, real world, day to day, feeling it, consequences of consumerism, aren't they? We have manufactured way too much stuff. We have, by and large, collectively, as a society, bought into the new and shiny is best mantra that we're trained to buy into, both literally and figuratively. And now here we are. We've got homes full of clutter. Our stress levels, our cortisol levels are rising. What do we do? And so on today's show, first of all, let me say this is an easy breezy listening episode. This episode is perfect to put on while you are decluttering an area in your home that, let's be honest, needs some attention. My home needs a lot of attention as well. So I hope today that you put this episode on and tackle an area. And while you're doing so, I hope that you perhaps think about the effects of consumerism on your life, on your personal life. So here today to help you and me do all of this and more is Jenny Albertini. Jenny is a professional organizer. She is also the author of the new book. It's out now. It is titled Decluttered: Mindful Organizing for Health, Home, and Beyond. Jenny, I'm so thrilled to talk to you today. How are you?
I'm doing well, Stephanie. How are you?
I'm so great. I'm so excited to talk about decluttering, my actual favorite topic.
I love that.
So tell us about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And how did you get here?
Sure. So I'm a certified professional organizer, and I specialize in helping people really get down to the root causes of clutter in their life and then set up systems to effectively address it. I spent a long time, like 2 decades, working in the public health field and have some additional training as a mindfulness facilitator. And all of those things have really helped me bring up this specific perspective to working with my clients that I enjoy. And that's what I get to do today.
You mentioned like getting to the root of the reasons why we have clutter. And I'm just curious, what are some of those reasons? Because I feel like for me, the reason is children, like the children who cause the clutter. But for those of us without children, what do you see in your practice?
What I see a lot of is that people are doing so much every day, all the time. The to-do lists are piling up, the work responsibilities, the family responsibilities. And when we've got that happening to our schedules, and at the same time, our society has made it so easy to bring stuff into our homes, right? So consumption is increasing, the volumes of stuff we're bringing in and working and using around, it just becomes overwhelming. And so that's some of the reason. And then a lot of things have come up in recent years in research around some of the health challenges that people are experiencing that can actually affect how we deal with clutter. So those are like the underlying issues such as ADHD or depression and chronic fatigue. So different conditions that actually make it more difficult for people to manage clutter on a daily basis.
Mm. Well, you mentioned there the fact that some underlying health conditions can contribute to the accumulation of clutter. But I also learned from your book that the accumulation of clutter can negatively impact our health and wellness. So it goes bidirectionally. Talk to me about that. How is our clutter perhaps negatively impacting our health and wellness?
So clutter has actually been linked to responses that our bodies have, such as, I mean, one of the things that I think many people know about is cortisol, which is a stress hormone. So people have found that when you are living in a space that has more clutter than you feel comfortable with, then your cortisol levels can actually go up. So that's causing all sorts of challenges for you to manage your stress on a daily basis. But it also can cause enhanced procrastination tendencies. And that means looking at a pile of clutter has been linked to people putting off making doctor's appointments or going for a walk or doing anything that might be positively influencing their health. Because when they look at the clutter, it's saying, oh my gosh, I have so much to do. I can't possibly even start it or do anything else. And then, of course, there are these environmental health hazards that clutter is also linked to. So just the buildup of extra stuff can cause people to not be able to get out of fire escapes in their homes or reach doorways. It can block sunlight, which is so important to our well-being. So all sorts of things like that are reasons why clutter is actually becoming a health hazard for many people.
It's so interesting. Your answer there really fascinates me because I've never seen an ad for a thing that mentions in the disclaimer portion all of these potential negative impacts, right? Like you hear an
Yes.
ad for a drug, let's say, and then there's the 60-second disclaimer at the end. But for the new sundress or the new rug or the new whatever item, new handbag, like you don't hear this disclaimer. So it's important that we know that, okay, this thing looks shiny and new, let's say, and it might bring us that temporary burst of dopamine, feel good hormone. However, maybe on the back end is the cortisol or
Oh,
maybe go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm like nodding my head in agreement. What comes to mind, especially for me, are those subscription-based shopping boxes that sometimes people will get, and they just keep coming unless you are actually actively turning them off and returning things. And if I could put a warning label on anything, it would be one of those, because that just leads to such a volume increase that most often people are really only using a small percentage of what's coming in that type of subscription service.
Yes. The subscriptions are great for the brands because they get
Yes.
a cha-ching every month, but
Yeah.
perhaps not so good for our homes and not so great for our wellness, is what I hear you saying there. But okay, so I just must say that I know an awful lot of people who don't seem to be affected by clutter. I mean, maybe in the quiet of their own homes, when I'm not around, they're triggered by it. But it does seem to me that there are some people who not just live, but thrive in an environment that to me seems a little excessive, like a lot of stuff everywhere all the time.
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
do we have different thresholds for clutter? And if so, how can we know if the clutter, the stuff in our homes, is triggering us? Like, how do we know?
I would definitely say that people do have different thresholds. You might think of it like people have different tastes for foods, different levels of spiciness that they can handle. People will have individual responses to the volume and type of clutter that they might have. So someone might get really triggered by a stack of newspapers by the door all the time, but having a closet that's overstuffed might not bother them so much. These things are often patterns that we've learned from the homes that we grew up in, like what was an acceptable level of stuff to keep of any of these categories, and what were even accepted practices for regularly decluttering and organizing. Now, when you ask about like keeping in mind what to be aware of, I think most people know or can sense, even if they don't want to articulate it, when they've reached a level of a problem. Oftentimes that comes up in response and in relation with other people. So if you're living at home by yourself, you're fine with your clutter, but then someone moves in with you and they don't feel good about it, and you want to have a harmonious household, that might be a trigger point for you to say, oh, let's address this and find maybe a common ground or some shared understanding about what we're going to do to have just a level of clutter and order also on the other end of the spectrum that makes us both feel okay in this place.
Yeah. So if it's hindering the interpersonal relationships is perhaps what I'm hearing you saying. So if you don't want to have people come over because your house is
Yeah.
in disarray,
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Because for extreme ends of cluttering, you can also look, of course, for are there physical limitations in the household because of clutter? Is it so difficult to walk through a hallway or to find what you need in a pantry because the volume of stuff is so high? Those are also similar things. Like when you can't do your daily tasks or when they're so difficult, that's probably a point that you could look and examine, oh, what's going on here? And can I change it so I feel better on a daily basis?
Okay. So I'm going to just try and talk through something that I'm working with in my own life. And it's not going to be eloquent. And I'm sorry, Jenny, but it's something I've been thinking about, which is when I first had a child and that child became a toddler and then that toddler got a sibling, the clutter really affected me. Like
Hmm.
I couldn't function. I don't know how to put it into words other than to say that being home really stressed me out because everywhere I looked was a problem and I was the only one fixing the problems. And the longer we stayed home, the more problems
Yeah.
there were for me to fix. However, now my children are older and they're still creating problems. Like they're not like cleaning up after themselves by any means. However, I have noticed that my threshold for managing the problems has increased.
Mhm.
And on the one hand, that's lovely. Like I'm refocusing around what really matters.
Yeah.
And so that's great. But on the other hand, my home is kind of a hot mess. So do you have any thoughts there? Am I normal? Am I just, really depressed and need to work on stuff? Give it to me. Be honest.
Sure. Let me try. So I really actually like hearing that your response is a little easier now, that you're not quite so frantic about it. Because what that tells me is that your window of tolerance has widened a little bit. That's often the time that it takes for us to respond to a reaction. And when we're being mindful and thoughtful about our life, like we want that to be a little bit long. It's what prevents us from lashing out at a kid for not picking up their backpacks or yelling at someone because they didn't put the laundry away right away. So you do want that. So those are good things. I think also you've probably recognized over these years and different phases of your kids, what is a new normal and a new reset for level for your home, which I'm sure is different than what it was pre-children. And this happens to all families that I know and work with. Things change. Even just the amount and type of stuff that kids has changes. There's so much stuff when they're little, and then the toys change and the clothes change as they're growing up. And so you're always going to have these types of shifts. And that's just important to recognize. Now, to feel a little better, I would, and often sort of ask, like, what age are the kids and what's their involvement in the putting away of things, the letting go of stuff when the volume gets too high? Because even from an early age, kids can become involved in that process, and then it makes them a part of the whole household. They're helping take care of the home. They're helping to keep things orderly so that people aren't stressed. And so it is easy to have friends over and to do things like that. I always work with parents and think about what's important to you in this dialogue that you're having with your kid, and how do you want them to participate in the decluttering throughout their life as they're growing up.
I like that. I'll also just say for me too, it's a constant balancing act, a constant renegotiation of living with other people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if I was living alone, my living space would look one way. But I
Mhm.
have a husband who has vastly different beliefs or understandings around what a lived-in home looks like. And then we add my two tornadoes into the mix, aka my
Mhm.
children. And so it's all about finding the middle ground where we can all live somewhat harmoniously. And that's really hard to do just in general. But I would argue that it's probably even harder when we have homes that need some decluttering, need some work. So we're talking about decluttering today as an act that reduces stress. However, the act of decluttering is really darn stressful. And depending on the size of the job, aka how much clutter you have, like the amount of stress rises with the size of the job. So what do you say to that? I mean, I'm sure I have people listening to us right now and they're saying, I don't want to get started because the job is just too big and too overwhelming. What do you say to them?
Yeah, if you're feeling really overwhelmed facing the declutter of your home, we want to take a deep breath. Sometimes I encourage people to go for a walk outside, get some fresh air, really regulate your nervous system. But mostly we want to consider how can we set you up for success? And that means making this as easy as possible with small categories at a time for decluttering. So I want to help people identify what time during a day or during a week when your energy is most aligned with that activity of decluttering, which usually means collecting all of the items of any one category, letting go of the things that you're not using anymore, and then organizing what you do want to keep. And so we want to really schedule a time that's specific to that type of energy. And people can figure out like, oh, okay, when I'm going to be focused and not be distracted by lots of work calls coming in. And so sometimes people will say, you know what, that's like early in the morning before my day gets started, or maybe it's a Sunday afternoon for a few hours. So just identifying the right time to do it can really go a long way. And then I also really spend a lot of time working with people on figuring out what has caused the clutter. So as you said, maybe it's your husband who has a different expectation around clutter around the house. So if that's the case, then I actually need to spend some time communicating with him and having a discussion about what are your shared goals for how the house is going to be organized and what do you need to do to support each other in reaching that middle ground. Relationships are a big cause of clutter, whether it's stuff being sent by parents or partners who aren't cleaning up or tidying up their part of their side of the house and things like that. And oftentimes decluttering needs to start with those conversations.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because we're sold the idea that we can have unlimited anything if we just buy
Mhm.
it, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
our homes cannot hold unlimited amounts of stuff. And I always love to say, I did not come up with this. I wish I did because it's so great. But today's it item is tomorrow's clutter. Like it's the stuff we're going to declutter tomorrow. We are so overconsumptive as a society. And so the best way to not send stuff that we didn't need, didn't want, didn't love, didn't use, shouldn't have spent our money on. The best way to not do any of that is to just not buy it at the beginning. And yet here we are, we're decluttering. And so I would love it if you walked us through your framework for decluttering. But what I love about your framework is that it's rooted in the fact that we're decluttering not for the Crate and Barrel catalog tidiness, not for the picture perfect home, not so when people come over, they look at our spaces and they think, oh, wow, you're living large. Your space is perfect. You specialize in decluttering with health and wellness in mind. So give us your framework.
My framework really encourages people to explore that mindfulness behind the clutter and how and why it's come into our life and why it's important to declutter our ways out of it. So, as you say, I really want to get down with people around what are the health challenges they're experiencing? What do they hope to have in terms of health and wellness in their life? And what are the items that are around them? Or the stuff, because I also deal with the clutter on schedules and things that's preventing them from feeling their best, feeling like they're clutter free in any of those areas. And I do this by working with people, whether it's through writing prompts and journal exercises or communicating with partners and parents, because I think that we need to have a real different approach to dealing with decluttering than we've been doing over the last decade plus of stuff around decluttering online. I think that those practices, while helpful, perhaps have not helped people dig deeply enough into what's going on to cause the clutter and offer new ways to approach it differently. And that's what I try and do, because I really want, and in my approach, we really are trying to reduce any shame that people might be feeling around the state of their homes or their offices and allow them to have a transformative experience as they're setting up a space for really healthy and intentional living. So that's what I try and guide people through when I'm working with them to address the root causes of clutter, of course, with as much compassion as possible for themselves and for other people that they're living with.
I like that you mentioned mindfulness there, Jenny, because you wouldn't know this, but my listeners, my longtime ride or die listeners know that when it comes to sustainable minimalism, mindfulness is essential piece number one.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be going inside. Have to be going internal. We have to be asking ourselves, why are we buying this? Why are we bringing this into our lives? Why are we? And then you fill in the statement. That is number one. And we have to be getting into the habit of asking the why question. Companies, corporations, mega corporations, they don't want us to ask the why.
No.
Because oftentimes when we ask ourselves the why, not always, but often when we ask ourselves why, the answer does not lead to a purchase of a thing. Yeah. And so we're going to take our sponsor break, Jenny, but when we get back, I want to talk about managing clutter for the long haul. So we have a cluttered home, we declutter it. How do we not reclutter it? Mm-hmm. That's my question. I'm going to ask that after our sponsor break. And we're back. Today I'm speaking with Jenny Albertini. She is a professional organizer. She is also the author of the new book just released. It is titled Decluttered: Mindful Organizing for Health, Home, and Beyond. And can I just say, Jenny, when decluttering got a lot of attention, maybe, 12 years ago, maybe, it was all about sparking joy and very hedonistic, let's say, get rid of this and replace it with this and don't confront the reasons why you're overbuying in the first place. And don't worry about what you're doing to the planet. Don't worry about it. Just spark joy. And this podcast has been in existence for 6 years. Anybody who's been listening knows I have a lot of problems with that messaging. And so I'm really excited to talk to somebody who links decluttering to improvement in wellness, decluttering as an act of wellness, but it's also an act of environmental wellness too, because I must just say, decluttering for me was a powerful way for me to get in touch with my overconsumption habits. If I didn't declutter all the excess in my home when my daughter was, 15 months old, let's say, I don't know if I ever would have taken a good hard look at all the stuff I was buying that I never needed in the first place. So I'll just say that to anybody listening, decluttering can be a really great wake-up call, as well as a great practice for mental and emotional wellness. I have to say that. But how do we manage our clutter, manage our buying habits, manage our parents and in-laws who are giving us all their stuff as they're downsizing? Like, how do we manage all the influx of stuff so that we don't end up with a cluttered house again?
Oh, those are so many different streams of things coming in. I can feel it. And I know exactly what you're talking about because I deal with it all the time for my clients. One, that last point that you talk about, the in-laws constantly sending things over. Unfortunately, that's a conversation that's sometimes really tough to have. And I find that it's often helpful for people to let people know that they are interested in decluttering. They're doing a shopping pause for a little while. They'd like to redirect the love and attention that those things are meant to represent into experiences or investments in college savings accounts and other things. Because in general, with all of these streams of stuff that's coming into our houses, we're looking for the why. Like, why is someone keep sending us stuff? And with grandparents, it's often wanting to stay close and show their love. Now, for the stuff that we're buying, Stephanie, that's that hard look that you were talking about doing many years ago. I find that a really good way for identifying where your purchasing is leaning is grouping the items that you have within your home by category. That's really how I go about decluttering and pulling everything together. I am trained in the KonMari method, and I like that structure that it brings to a decluttering session because it lets us visualize and actually see how much we've accumulated and purchased of any one category so we can identify, oh, wow, like there's a year's worth of paper towels in my basement because I just keep buying them. I'm not really identifying that I have enough and I don't need any more. So I think that's a helpful thing. And in general, we're just trying to look for any opportunities to reduce the volume of what's coming into your home. So let's ask ourselves, like, how is it getting here? Is it getting here because my kid keeps bringing stuff home from school? Is it getting here because I'm online shopping a lot or doing bulk orders a lot? Whichever the issue is, where the issue is coming from, that's what we need to address. And then once you're doing this, identifying what these things are, how these things are getting to our house, we have to really think about getting down to a volume that will easily fit into our homes. So of course, every space is a little bit different, but if you are overstuffing cupboards, pantries, closet, it will never get easier for you because it will always be a challenge to find and use and put away what you actually want. And so we really want to think about how can we right size the volume of what we keep in a home to what is just that easy, like first layer deep of stuff stored on shelves and behind doors.
I like that. I'm just thinking about, though, my in-laws.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, you mentioned obviously the stuff we're buying, and that's a really important place to hone in on our mindfulness. Are we buying too many paper towels because they're on sale, etc.? However, I'm thinking about the older people in my life who are trying to gift us stuff that is good quality, real wood, let's say, or, real wool, or you name it, like good stuff, but stuff that we frankly don't need. Do you have any thoughts there? Because my in-laws, my own parents too, they never learned how to declutter. And I say that with love if any of them are listening. Like, I love you all, but you never learned the important skill of decluttering, and now you need to downsize. And the only way they know how to do it is to pass it on to their children. Any thoughts there?
Oh gosh, this has become such a challenge throughout the country that the US Senate has recently issued a report on this. The consequences of clutter with older Americans is set to overwhelm people of our generation and even perhaps our kids behind us. What's happening is that the older generation has really subscribed and set a standard and sentimental attachment to the idea of giving things to their kids or keeping them in the home until they pass away. And that has become very unhelpful. So as you very clearly said, you know that these things that that are being offered to you, you don't want, you don't need, perhaps they don't fit in your home. And the discussion really needs to be like, how is it that you draw boundaries around something that is so clear with someone who is trying to do something that's frankly going to cause you more stress in the future if you have to deal with it. So as early as possible, I encourage people to start the decluttering process and really think about, hey, can I try and sell these items now? Can I try and give them away now? And then use the money or use the free space for good things and fun activities and stuff like that. Because also the earlier that some of these things are sold and given away, the better value you're going to recoup if that's what you're trying to do. When they sit for decades upon decades, very rarely are you seeing an increased return on investment with that type of stuff. And it's not a conversation that people like to have because it, of course, involves end of life decisions and estate planning, things like that. But I'm seeing just too many people in their 40s and 50s these days being really left with a huge household's worth of burden because their parents didn't take time to go through their things earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. It's some uncomfortable conversations that need to be had, but nobody wants to have those uncomfortable conversations. So a lot of people, a lot of 40-year-olds just take the stuff, which is a sustainable minimalist nightmare. I'm living it. But back to what's within our control. So I can't control the fact that my parents never learned how to declutter, right? Like I can't control that. I can control my response and I'm working on it. But back to me bringing stuff into my home for a minute. Do you have anything to say about changing purchasing habits, changing receptivity to ads as a means of buying less stuff? Like where does that fall into your framework?
Sure. So to me, the change in our purchasing habits is really key. And what we're trying to identify while we're decluttering your things is where are your spots for weakness or for overbuying? And then how is that happening so we can change it? So one common thing that I will do with clients is set up just on their phones, on the Notes app, or, something that's called like someday maybe. And what we're going to try and do is every time you're on your phone and you're hit with an ad that says, oh, that book looks really good. Oh, that new hairbrush, that's going to solve my hair problems, things like that. While you're in this decluttering mode, instead of buying it immediately, I just want you to write the name of the item, maybe the brand, maybe the store, whatever are the identifying features, and put it on that someday maybe list. And the goal is to train yourself away from the buying it immediately and to just putting it on your list. And how I use this with my clients is that while we're decluttering, say, your clothes, the goal is to not bring any more clothing into the home. And so you would just wait until you were done with that process. And then you could look back on that list and say, oh, now that I've really mindfully examined what I have, what I want to have, what I'm wearing, are there any items on this list that I still want? Most often, because you've allowed that window to stretch and you are past that dopamine rush of wanting to buy something right away, you no longer want it. And that's that type of practice in terms of giving yourself space between the stimulus of seeing it online and the actual practicality of buying it. That will often help people get into a different mindset about how often and buying things so regularly.
Mm. I'll also say too, listeners, many of you already know, but having that decluttered, open space in which your attention is not called to this, that, and every pile, that is its own reward, right? So I'm guessing that once the hard work of decluttering and getting your space the way you want it is done, it's going to snowball. So you're going to like it and you're going to want to keep it up. And usually that means, having hard talks, but it's also buying less stuff. Like it's all connected. It's all related. It's all interrelated. So Jenny, tell us about your new book, Decluttered. Tell us what's in there that we didn't discussed today. Tell us where we can find it. Give us all of it.
Oh, thanks. The book really is a continuation of what we've talked about today, Stephanie. I examine the underlying issues around clutter within health concepts, our home environment, and beyond. And beyond to me is both work and community settings. And what I do in each of the sections of the book is I share a lot of client stories and also a number of practical exercises that people can use to keep interrogating why clutter is showing up in different areas and what they can do about it. And so there are tips that range from setting up systems for more organized homes to having discussions with your bosses and your in-laws about cluttered schedules or being sent too many things. So I wanted it to be a range of options that the reader could pick and choose from, depending on where they were feeling the most overwhelmed with clutter in their life. Yeah, I think I've really enjoyed the writing process and got to bring in a lot of my experience working in public health for so long, and also my mindfulness training and thousands of hours of decluttering with people so far. So I think it's a really fresh and different way to look at clutter that so many of us are experiencing in different areas of our life.
And isn't clutter such a 2024 problem, right? Like overconsumption. That's where we're at these days. And now we need to deal with it. I just think that's post-industrial revolution. It's so interesting that here we are. Now we're dealing with the effects of all the stuff that we manufactured. So I'll leave it there. That could be a whole nother episode. But Jenny, I just want to thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Stephanie.
Listeners, that's a wrap. Show notes are at mamaminimalist.com/486. And we do have an eco tip today. Today, our eco tip comes from Libby. Libby listened to the recent episode on not eating microplastics. And Libby wrote to me and she said that Lipton, so we all know Lipton, right? Lipton tea. They're original, and it must be original string and tag tea bags are plastic free. They're compostable. So they're fastened with a metal staple instead of the plastic glue, essentially. And the metal staple, you can either remove it or it will compost long term. It'll rust and decompose on its own. The bag itself that the tea sits in is compostable. Even the box and the paper and the envelope that all the stuff comes in, it's all plastic free. Now, the box does come wrapped in plastic for some asinine reason. I don't know why. So maybe we can all write to Lipton. But otherwise, you can feel good about composting your original, and it must be original, string and tag tea bags from Lipton. So, Libby, thank you so much for that eco tip. Great. I love it. I'm always happy to hear about companies and corporations doing things in a little more intentional and eco-friendly of a manner. We will be back on Thursday, listeners. I will see you then. If you like this show, please review it. Thank you so much. I appreciate you reviewing the show, taking 30 seconds, 60 seconds out of your day to support it in that way. I appreciate you. See you Thursday, and take care.